The lies linking me with the disgraceful Jeffrey Epstein need to end today. The individuals lying about me are devoid of ethical standards, humility, and respect. I do not object to their ignorance, but rather I reject their mean-spirited attempts to defame my reputation. I never been friends with Epstein. Donald and I were invited to the same parties as Epstein from time to time, since overlapping in social circles is common in New York City and Palm Beach. To be clear, I never had a relationship with Epstein or his accomplice, Maxwell. My email reply to Maxwell cannot be categorized as anything more than casual correspondence. My polite reply to her email doesn't amount to anything more than a trivial note.
What's happening, friends? Welcome to Dr. John Podcast right now. The White House's desire to bury the Epstein scandal, Melania Trump's extraordinary and out-of-the-blue statement calling for congressional hearings for Epstein's victims was covered across BBC, CBC, Fox, CNN, and France 24, with the latter quoting, "The lady doth protest too much." The documentation reveals a White House operation that publicly wants accountability for victims while simultaneously pressuring allies behind the scenes, creating a striking contradiction in how the administration handles the Epstein scandal. The president is excellent at controlling the narrative. He grabs that laser pointer, points it at the wall, and everyone goes like a little cat trying to follow it. This is something that has escaped containment not just in the media more broadly, but also in other arenas. This is very tough terrain for him. It's politics 101 that if the train is leaving the station anyway, you might as well get in the conductor's car and seem to be in control of the situation. After his unsuccessful attempts to stop this from taking hold in the House when it became clear that was not going to work, and the votes were there and could not be budged.
I am not Epstein's victim. Epstein did not introduce me to Donald Trump. I met my husband by chance at a New York City party in 1998. This initial encounter with my husband is documented in detail in my book, Melania. The first time I crossed paths with Epstein was in the year 2000 at an event Donald and I attended together. At the time, I had never met Epstein and had no knowledge of his criminal undertakings. Numerous fake images and statements about Epstein and me have been circulating on social media for years now. Be cautious about what you believe. These images and stories are completely false. I'm not a witness or a named witness in connection with any of Epstein's crimes.
He decided he might as well make it look like this was his idea with a public hearing. Can you believe this? Let me walk you through the specific First Lady White House Epstein statement first, because it represents exactly the kind of dramatic Epstein scandal revival moment our headline captures. In a formal statement posted on the White House site and delivered on camera, she specifically declared that the lies linking her with the disgraceful Jeffrey Epstein need to end today through her direct quoted statement. She specifically said she has never been friends with Epstein through her direct quoted denial. She specifically said she first crossed paths with Epstein in the year 2000 through her direct quoted recollection. The crossing of paths specifically happened at an event she attended with the president through documented institutional contacts. She specifically said they were in overlapping social circles in New York and Palm Beach through her direct quoted acknowledgement.
My name has never appeared in court documents, depositions, victim statements, or FBI interviews surrounding the Epstein matter. I have never had any knowledge of Epstein abuse of his victims. I was never involved in any capacity. I was not a participant, was never on Epstein's plane, and never visited his private island. I have never been legally accused or convinced of a crime in connection with Epstein's sex trafficking, abuse of minors, and other repulsive behavior. The false smears about me from mean-spirited and politically motivated individuals and entities looking to cause damage to my good name, to gain financially and climb politically, must stop. My attorneys and I have fought these unfounded and baseless lies with success and will continue to maintain my sound reputation without hesitation.
She specifically said she had no knowledge of his criminal undertakings through her direct quoted denial. She specifically stressed she was never on Epstein's plane through her direct quoted denial. She specifically stressed she never visited his private island through her direct quoted denial. She specifically said she was not a participant, victim, or witness in any Epstein-related investigation through her direct quoted denial. Let me repeat those First Lady White House Epstein statement details so they're absolutely clear. Formal statement posted on White House site and delivered on camera. Lies linking me with disgraceful Jeffrey Epstein need to end today. Never been friends with Epstein. First crossed paths in 2000. Event she attended with the president. Overlapping social circles in New York and Palm Beach. No knowledge of criminal undertakings. Never on Epstein's plane. Never visited private island. Not participant, victim, or witness in any Epstein-related investigation. The specific First Lady White House Epstein statement details represent comprehensive professional documentation defining the dramatic Epstein scandal revival moment.
To date, several individuals and companies have been legally obligated to publicly apologize and retract their lies about me, such as Daily Beast, James Carville, and HarperCollins, UK. Now is the time for Congress to act. Epstein was not alone. Several prominent male executives resigned from their powerful positions after this matter became widely politicized. Of course, this doesn't amount to guilt, but we still must work openly and transparently to uncover the truth. I call on Congress to provide the women who have been victimized by Epstein with a public hearing specifically centered around the survivors. Give these victims their opportunity to testify under oath in front of Congress with the power of sworn testimony. Each and every woman should have her day to tell her story in public if she wishes, and then her testimony should be permanently entered into the congressional record.
Think about what specifically a sitting First Lady stepping to a White House lectern to deliver a rare prepared statement about a notorious convicted sex offender while explicitly acknowledging overlapping social circles in New York and Palm Beach and a specific 2000 event with the sitting president actually functions in comprehensive American political analysis. Specific patterns of First Lady prepared statements about notorious convicted sex offenders represent fundamental political concern that documented exceptional cases generate. The dynamic demonstrates comprehensive political concern affecting American political culture, regardless of various specific defensive characterizations. Come on, are you kidding me with how dramatically the Maxwell email and the Lady Doth protest too much expanded the documentation? The First Lady specifically acknowledged an email exchange with Ghislaine Maxwell through her direct quoted acknowledgement. She specifically called her own reply a polite and trivial note through her direct quoted characterization. She specifically said the reply should not be read as a relationship through her direct quoted position. Critics on social media and France 24 specifically responded by quoting the Lady Doth protest too much through documented public response. Critics specifically argued that by bringing up specific details, she may have invited more scrutiny rather than calming speculation through documented analytical observation. The details specifically include the Maxwell email through documented institutional context. The details specifically include the 2000 event through documented institutional context. Let me repeat those Maxwell email and Lady Doth protest too much details. The First Lady acknowledged email exchange with Ghislaine Maxwell. Polite and trivial note should not be read as relationship. Critics and France 24 quoted Lady Doth protest too much. By bringing up specific details may have invited more scrutiny rather than calming speculation. Maxwell email 2000 event. The specific Maxwell email and Lady Doth protest too much details represent comprehensive professional documentation defining the broader scrutiny landscape. Let's really dig into the full picture of American political accountability. American political accountability specifically operates through various established frameworks. Specific patterns of consistent First Lady messaging discipline through traditional norms include calibrated White House scandal management through traditional institutional frameworks. The specific approach we're examining essentially represents documented departure from these traditional frameworks, regardless of various specific defensive characterizations. The specific Congress survivor hearings call context deserves particular attention. In the same statement, the First Lady specifically called on Congress to provide the women who have been victimized by Epstein with a public hearing through her direct quoted demand. The hearing specifically will be centered around the survivors through her direct quoted framework. She specifically said, "Only then will we have the truth," through her direct quoted statement. House oversight leaders specifically quickly signaled openness to such hearings through documented institutional response. The hearing specifically would put Epstein back in the headlines through documented analytical framework. The hearing specifically could put pressure on the Trump Justice Department through documented analytical observation. The pressure specifically concerns what the Justice Department has and hasn't done for victims through documented analytical context. Let me repeat those Congress survivor hearings call details. The First Lady called on Congress to provide women victimized by Epstein with a public hearing centered around survivors. Only then will we have truth. House oversight leaders signaled openness, would put Epstein back in headlines, pressure on Trump Justice Department over what it has and hasn't done for victims. The specific Congress survivor hearings called details represent comprehensive professional documentation defining the broader institutional pressure landscape, regardless of various specific defensive characterizations. Now let me walk you through the specific, extraordinary, and out-of-the-blue context. The BBC specifically called the statement extraordinary through their direct quoted characterization. The CBC specifically called the statement extraordinary through their direct quoted characterization. Other outlets specifically called the statement out of the blue through their direct quoted characterization. The outlets specifically noted no new public allegation against the First Lady had surfaced that week through documented analytical observation. The noting specifically raised questions about why she chose that moment to speak through documented analytical conclusion. The dynamic represents documented multi-outlet professional reporting on documented timing concerns regardless of various specific defensive characterizations. Let me repeat those extraordinary and out-of-the-blue details. BBC and CBC called statement extraordinary. Other outlets called out of the blue. No new public allegation against the First Lady surfaced that week. Raised questions about why she chose that moment to speak. Documented multi-outlet professional reporting on timing concerns. The specific extraordinary and out-of-the-blue details represent comprehensive international and North American professional documentation defining the broader timing concern landscape. Now let me tell you about the specific Epstein survivors' pushback context. Epstein survivors interviewed afterward specifically said they welcome any push for hearings through documented institutional response. Epstein survivors specifically emphasized that the onus is on the Trump administration and DOJ through their direct quoted characterization. Epstein survivors specifically said the onus is not just on Congress through their direct quoted framework. The pushback specifically rejects the First Lady's attempt to shift responsibility through documented analytical observation. The pushback specifically positions Trump administration responsibility as the central issue through documented analytical framework. Let me repeat those Epstein survivors' pushback details. Epstein survivors welcomed push for hearings, emphasized onus on Trump administration and DOJ, not just Congress, rejected the First Lady's attempt to shift responsibility, positioned Trump administration responsibility as central. The specific Epstein Epstein survivors' pushback details represent comprehensive professional documentation defining the broader survivor response landscape. Think about how specifically Epstein survivors publicly emphasizing that the onus is on the Trump administration and DOJ rather than just Congress in direct response to a First Lady's statements actually functions in comprehensive American institutional analysis. Specific patterns of crime survivors publicly redirecting accountability emphasis back to sitting administrations represent fundamental institutional concern that documented exceptional cases generate. The dynamic demonstrates comprehensive institutional concern affecting American political culture, regardless of various specific defensive characterizations. Now let me walk you through the specific consistent denial context across Fox News, BBC, and CNN. The First Lady consistently denies any personal wrongdoing through documented multi-outlet reporting. The official White House transcript specifically shows the same consistent denial through documented institutional record. She specifically denies any role in Epstein's operations through documented institutional position. She specifically denies any knowledge of his crimes at the time through documented institutional position. The controversy specifically is about how much detail she volunteered through documented analytical framework. The controversy specifically is about why she did it now through documented analytical framework. The controversy specifically is about how it re-energizes scrutiny of Trump world's ties to Epstein through documented analytical conclusion. Let me repeat those consistent denial details. Fox News, BBC, and CNN show the First Lady consistently denies personal wrongdoing. White House transcript shows consistent denial, denies role in operations, denies knowledge of crimes at time. Controversy about how much detail volunteered, why she did it now, how it re-energizes scrutiny of Trump world's ties to Epstein. The specific consistent denial details represent comprehensive, multi-outlet professional documentation defining the broader analytical reality landscape. Now let me tell you about the specific Epstein back on front page strategy backfire context. By stepping out herself, the First Lady specifically put Epstein back on the front page through documented analytical observation. The stepping out specifically reminded people that she and the president share social spaces with Epstein through documented analytical framework. The stepping out specifically added new specific claims through documented analytical observation. The new claims specifically include the 2000 encounter and the Maxwell email through documented analytical context. The new claims specifically can now be checked against other evidence through documented analytical framework. The strategy specifically undercuts the White House strategy of letting the Epstein story fade through documented analytical conclusion. Critics specifically say the high-profile self-defense only deepens suspicions rather than truly clearing the air through documented analytical conclusion. Let me repeat those Epstein back on front page strategy backfire details. Put Epstein back on front page. Reminded people she and the president shared social spaces. Added new specific claims. 2000 encounter. Maxwell email. Can now be checked against other evidence. Undercuts White House strategy of letting story fade. Critics say deepens suspicions rather than clearing air. The specific Epstein back on front page strategy backfire details represent comprehensive analytical documentation defining the broader strategic backfire landscape. Now let me walk you through the specific connection to broader Trump landscape we've covered in previous discussions. The president's fury as a key ally dropped text receipts and forced Epstein files into the light provides direct context for understanding documented Epstein files Transparency Act, overwhelming House and Senate passage, and documented text screenshot release connecting directly to the timing and landscape of the First Lady's speech. The president being hit by devastating lawsuits from Epstein survivors provides direct context for understanding documented Epstein survivor class action landscape and documented millions in dismissal. The president's obsession with previous administrations backfiring as retribution push deepens his own legal nightmares, provides foundation for understanding documented long-standing rage at political opponents resurfacing during Epstein uproar context. The president's Justice Department in crash mode after multiple legal losses provides foundation for understanding documented anti-weaponization fund landscape. The president in total panic as another top lawyer quits and the Justice Department crumbles provides foundation for understanding broader Department of Justice accountability landscape. The president's judge dropping scathing rulings on him provides foundation for understanding broader judicial accountability landscape. The president cracking after outraged judges drop nightmare rulings provides foundation for understanding broader judicial accountability landscape. The president fearing impeachment after losing major Supreme Court cases provides foundation for understanding documented Supreme Court rulings. The president terrified as midterm blow could trigger third impeachment provides foundation for understanding documented presidential admission about potential impeachment. The president storming out of court after judge gives surprise takedown provides foundation for understanding broader courtroom accountability landscape. The president losing it as coalition civil war explodes provides foundation for understanding broader coalition pressure. Former Republican leaders attacking the president provides foundation for understanding documented Republican defection. The president's voters abandoning him after economic crisis provides foundation for understanding broader voter accountability landscape. The president being stunned as Americans finally rise against him provides foundation for understanding documented nationwide protest. The reporters and crowd bursting out laughing after the First Lady called the president empathetic provides direct foundation for understanding broader First Lady public messaging landscape. The president's cabinet official falling apart provides foundation for understanding broader First Lady public messaging landscape. The president arriving in foreign capitals provides foundation for understanding broader foreign policy accountability. Top former officials warning of cognitive decline provides foundation for understanding broader fitness accountability landscape. The president being confronted with 25th Amendment talk provides foundation for understanding broader institutional accountability landscape. All these factors together represent comprehensive accountability landscape that the documented First Lady Epstein speech backfire specifically extends regardless of various specific defensive characterizations. Now let me be completely fair for a minute because I want to present all sides of this honestly. Defenders of the president will make several arguments that deserve consideration. They'll argue that First Lady statements sometimes legitimately reflect specific personal considerations beyond pure accountability concerns. They'll argue that social circle acknowledgments sometimes reflect specific historical considerations beyond pure factual analysis. They'll argue that survivor hearing calls sometimes reflect specific institutional considerations beyond pure substantive concerns. Those are fair points worth considering. First Lady statements reflect personal considerations. Social circle acknowledgments reflect historical considerations. Survivor hearing calls reflect institutional considerations. All these considerations have some validity when evaluating complex questions about First Lady political messaging. But here's what makes the analysis of this specific situation more nuanced. The documented reporting by BBC, CBC, Fox News, and CNN about the First Lady's White House statement represents documented multi-outlet professional reporting on documented institutional event rather than abstract personal considerations. The documented direct quoted statement about lies linking her with Epstein needing to end today represents documented public First Lady statement rather than perspectives. The documented direct quoted acknowledgement of crossing paths in 2000 at an event with the president represents documented public institutional acknowledgement rather than perspectives. The documented direct quoted acknowledgement of overlapping social circles in New York and Palm Beach represents documented public institutional acknowledgement rather than perspectives. The documented direct quoted characterization of the Maxwell email as a polite and trivial note represents documented public institutional acknowledgement rather than perspectives. The documented France 24 Lady Doth protest too much critical response represents documented international professional analytical observation rather than perspectives. The documented First Lady Congress survivor hearings call represents documented public institutional demand rather than perspectives. The documented BBC and CBC extraordinary and out-of-the-blue characterizations represent documented multi-outlet analytical observation rather than perspectives. The documented Epstein survivors' onus on Trump administration and DOJ pushback represents documented institutional response rather than perspectives. The documented Epstein back on front page strategy backfire analysis represents documented professional analytical work rather than perspectives. Combined with broader Trump approach patterns, including various previously documented concerns, the cumulative pattern represents comprehensive analytical foundation. The overall pattern represents exactly the kind of comprehensive political accountability concern that deserves serious analysis. American voters benefit from accurate information about presidential institutional accountability through their political decision-making. American political culture benefits from analysis of accountability dynamics. American journalism benefits when systematic analysis applies established frameworks regardless of political considerations. American democratic culture benefits when systematic analysis of scandal dynamics produces accurate evaluation. The president personally loses when accurate analysis exposes documented overlapping social circles' acknowledgement against his distance messaging. His political operation loses when institutional realities make confident scandal management narratives harder to maintain through specific accumulated evidence, including the documented Maxwell email acknowledgement. American political culture benefits when accumulated documentation creates ongoing pressure for traditional accountability mechanisms. What comes next for all of this situation going forward? Continued documented Epstein scandal revival combined with accumulating analytical framework could eventually produce significant political consequences affecting his administration. Future presidential institutional engagement could potentially restore traditional discipline through institutional mechanisms. American political culture could potentially see additional precedents reinforcing accountability standards, or current patterns could continue indefinitely with accumulating American institutional accountability concerns affecting various specific situations during extended periods. Here's the last thing I really want you to take away from today's discussion. American political system specifically depends on functional political accountability that maintains institutional discipline through institutional procedures affecting comprehensive political culture. Previous American presidents of both parties have generally been subject to specific political accountability mechanisms regardless of specific institutional circumstances affecting various specific situations. The specific pattern of documented First Lady overlapping social circles acknowledgement combined with documented Maxwell email acknowledgement and documented Congress survivor hearings call represents fundamental departure from these traditional expectations affecting American political culture through various specific effects. Because at the end of the day, this whole story about the First Lady's surprise Epstein speech backfiring as her statement drags the president back into the scandal is really about whether American political accountability should be respected through factual professional analysis or systematically dismissed through confident distance messaging. The documented reporting by BBC, CBC, Fox News, and CNN about the First Lady's White House statement represents documented multi-outlet professional reporting regardless of various specific political considerations. The documented direct quoted statement about lies linking her with Epstein needing to end today represents documented public First Lady statement regardless of various specific defensive characterizations. The documented direct quoted acknowledgement of crossing paths in 2000 at an event with the president represents documented public institutional acknowledgement regardless of various specific political considerations. The documented direct quoted acknowledgement of overlapping social circles in New York and Palm Beach represents documented public institutional acknowledgement regardless of various specific defensive characterizations. The documented direct quoted characterization of the Maxwell email as a polite and trivial note represents documented public institutional acknowledgement regardless of various specific political considerations. The documented France 24 Lady Doth protest too much critical response represents documented international professional analytical observation regardless of various specific defensive characterizations. The documented First Lady Congress survivor hearings call represents documented public institutional demand regardless of various specific political considerations. The documented BBC and CBC extraordinary and out-of-the-blue characterizations represent documented multi-outlet analytical observation regardless of various specific defensive characterizations. The documented Epstein survivors' onus on Trump administration and DOJ pushback represents documented institutional response regardless of various specific political considerations. The documented documented Epstein back on front-page strategy backfire analysis represents documented professional analytical work, regardless of various specific defensive characterizations. All these legitimate aspects of American political accountability deserve substantive engagement rather than dismissive characterization through the president's exceptional scandal management messaging, regardless of specific political considerations affecting various political preferences. Whether American political culture eventually produces appropriate response to current Epstein scandal patterns depends on whether accumulated documentation eventually produces meaningful political consequences affecting how future presidents engage with their own scandal management accountability during extended periods. The documented First Lady overlapping social circles acknowledgement combined with documented Maxwell email acknowledgement and documented Congress survivor hearings call aren't going away, regardless of how aggressively the president characterizes specific findings as politically motivated. Their continued existence as documented political accountability realities creates ongoing American political culture pressure that traditional accountability mechanisms should address through appropriate substantive engagement rather than continued confident scandal management messaging patterns affecting various specific situations during extended political periods. The First Lady's statement was supposed to put the Epstein questions to rest. Instead, it accomplished the opposite. By stepping forward and addressing the issue directly, she put Epstein back on the front page. She reminded everyone that she and the president shared social spaces with a convicted sex offender. She added new specific claims about the 2000 encounter and the Maxwell email that can now be checked against other evidence. She undercut the White House strategy of letting the Epstein story fade, and critics say the high-profile self-defense only deepened suspicions rather than truly clearing the air. The Epstein survivors made it clear that the onus is on the Trump administration and the Justice Department, not just Congress. They rejected the First Lady's attempt to shift responsibility and positioned Trump administration responsibility as the central issue. This is not going away. The documented evidence continues to accumulate. The pressure continues to build. And American political culture continues to grapple with how to respond to the fundamental departure from traditional expectations that this presidency represents. The story of the First Lady's speech and its backfire is a story about how the best intentions to put a scandal to rest can instead breathe new life into it. It's about how denial and defensiveness can create more scrutiny than silence would have. And it's about how the Epstein scandal, despite years of efforts to bury it, continues to resurface and demand attention. The president wanted the Epstein story to fade from public attention, but his First Lady stepped to the podium and ensured it would not. The irony is profound, and the consequences are ongoing. Stay tuned for continued coverage of this developing situation because it is not over and there is much more to come. The Epstein scandal has a way of resurfacing at the most inopportune moments, and this was no exception. The First Lady's attempt to clear the air has only made the air more clouded. The questions that were supposed to be answered have only multiplied, and the scrutiny that was supposed to end has only intensified. That is the legacy of this extraordinary and out-of-the-blue statement from the White House. That is the story that continues to unfold.